Oh, the clear.
Right, well, kia ora koutou everyone. Welcome along to today's meeting. Great to have first formal meeting of the year, Local Water Done Well Subcommittee. Hope everyone's had a good refreshing break over Christmas New Year period, and we're well into work now at the end of January. I'll open with karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, ehi aki ana te atukura, e tio, e huka, e hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. And karakia based on thinking about a still start to things and the attitude and culture that we are bringing to this Local Water Done Well work is that there's a huge mountain in front of us, and we're going to hear soon about how big that is. But our approach to it is being sensible and not getting flustered and not allowing the winds of change to be the thing that drive us, but actually who we are and who we serve, and making good decisions for our community, being at the centre of our decision making as we work through what legislation is requiring us to do. There's no apologies today. I think we're all here. Any conflicts that we want to raise? No. And we've got one report and one new member of our team who has joined us. I'll just note that I haven't heard from Raveen, who may or may not join online. If he does, Therese, let us know. But Raveen is a member of this committee. So Tim, thank you for the report, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and Happy New Year, everyone. Good to see you. We thought it would be good timing to have a extraordinary committee meeting. We've like to introduce you to Murray Strong, who's been with us now for 2 weeks. He's come on board to help us investigate the establishment of the CCO as the interim establishment chair. I thought at the start of this, I might just outline how we see the reporting going for this committee into the future. We think there'll be 2 standard reports. The first will be a report from our project manager, Catherine, and that'll go into quite a bit of detail around project timelines and operational progress. And the second report will be from Murray, the establishment chair, and that will deal with some high level and strategic elements. Certainly not as long as Catherine's report, but we'll touch on some of those important aspects. At the moment, we're still in for once a month. We think there's going to be a need to have these meetings more regularly, albeit we think we can probably do that on Teams. There's not always going to be decisions to be made at those meetings, but given the pace that we're moving, it's just too big a gap, we feel, 4 weeks to make sure that we're keeping you abreast of all the important things that are going on. So look, we haven't got those booked in yet, but just keep an eye out for those, and we'll put those in as and when required. So look, I think I'll just hand over, welcome Murray. I'll hand over to Murray and ask Murray to take us through his first report.
Thanks, Tom. And Mayor Sam, thank you again, and to members of this committee, thank you for your warm welcome earlier in the day. It's nice to be a part of the team. And as I said, it's nice to be back in the old stamping ground where we have some very deep family relationships, with my son being born at 32 High Street, Leaston, which is the old doctor's house. So know the district well. I'll take the report as read. It's purposely brief simply because there's an operational workshop that's coming up in the next week or so, which will actually start to re-baseline where the program is at. Coming out of Christmas, we have the requirement to be very clear around the work that remains to be done, what the decision-making frameworks and timelines are as we head into consultation and then ultimately into the decision. The council about making sure that the opportunity to have the CCO up and running by the 1st of July was a quite clear and conscious choice. So we're working to your timeframes that we've set up in that regard. That will require us to be a little more flexible though in terms of how we go through that initial transition period. Good external support and advice. We have WARS, as Tim has mentioned, who are our program managers. Catherine Hill has been doing a good job from far afield in the Northern Hemisphere. She's back in February and she'll be participating in that workshop that week, as will our advisors from Simpson Grierson Law and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Both SG Law and PwC have done a significant amount of work in the local government space, as you're probably all aware. And they've been well across the changes and the proposed changes in relation to Bill 3 and the impacts that that will have on councils across the country. So the complexity of the program of work in terms of preparing for the potential the establishment of the CCO includes things like asset disaggregation, asset valuation, asset and liability transfer across into the CCO, contract and staff novation. And so essentially we need to have an organisation that's ready to function on day one. Part of the choices around that for us and for us to inform you of will be the way that we step through some of those decisions. What is mission critical for startup? What is something that we could do within sort of 2 or 3 quarters of establishment? And then what can we push out into a further time frame to make sure that we get the right things done in the right order? So a lot of that will be dependent on the outcomes of this upcoming workshop and the nature of the operating model that we will draft up and share with you at an appropriate time, which will essentially get us to the start line. I'm chunking those things down into 3 large chunks of time and activity. So from the period immediately after the council decision, if the decision is made to establish, to 1 July will be that very, very sprint focused establishment phase. There'll be a transfer across the 1 July boundary, which will be transition. We will move staff in and assets in and what we need to have operating for day one. And then we'll be driving towards a steady state. That steady state will essentially be defined by the Water Services Delivery Plan, which is a decision point that the government will take. And I think, Sam, you mentioned that earlier in the day. There are a couple of steps for decisions through the Department of Internal Affairs and the Minister of those Water Service Delivery Plans. Once those are approved, then we get into the full-blown effort of getting the CCO up and running at full capacity. I should also note that there are a couple of off-ramps that have been built into this timeline and sequencing. Given council has yet to make the final decision, there are off-ramps for work to be wound back and contracts ended if you get to that point on the 2nd of April. Otherwise, they will continue on and will bring additional resource in to support the work that we're doing. It's my intention to bring on board a program director to support the very heavily detailed focused work that Catherine and WARS are doing. And there is the potential for that person to transition into a leadership role in the CCO once the board's established and that role becomes more substantive. You'll see from the report that we've put together for you an outline of the draft governance framework that we're operating to. So we have the Local Water Done Well Committee, we have the program steering group, we have advisors and important stakeholders. I do note though that we've neglected to put Taumutu on that, so I make an apology for that. That'll be updated immediately subsequent to this meeting. And then of course we have the officials and the various agencies that we need to work with as well. It's going to require a lot of input and effort and attention from a lot of people, and the staff group within council have clearly turned their minds to this in a very direct manner, which is encouraging. As you and I were talking about as the meeting began, we don't have the luxury of time. So we need to make sure that we've got the right things being done in the right sequence to get us to the start line if that's where we need to get to. A couple of observations after sort of 2 weeks in the organisation. You approved a budget for the preparatory work for the CCO, including the retention of consultants, the developing of financial models and programs of activity and work. We'll be able to provide you with a much more specific breakdown of that budget and how it's going to be applied. And then we'll need to have a further conversation with you about what happens after the preparatory work is completed and we go into that full-blown establishment and transition phase. So that will be coming up to you at a later date. As I've already mentioned, the team is capable, but they're stretched. Business as usual is business as usual, and it's a large work program that they all have. So we will need the flexibility to provide internal secondments, ask people to be applied into various work streams, and also to look at enhancing that through external consultants and contractors. The operating model is focused on how we do things. The water services delivery plan will tell us what we're going to do, and the organisational design will inform who and how we're going to do that from a capability perspective. There's been a lot of interest shown in the way that Selwyn is approaching this establishment process, both from central agencies and ministers, and Sam, you had a conversation with Minister Watts earlier in the week, and all of that is encouraging in terms of the ability for folks to provide additional support to us because we're first, and it's a very strong leadership position that the Selwyn District Council has taken in considering this establishment process for Water Services CCO. I think I might leave it there, and then if it's normal for questions to be asked and answered, perhaps we could do that, or if there's any additional comment that you wish to make, Sam.
Thanks for that, Mark. Yeah, is there any questions or comments that people have on Murray and the work that's done to date and the reporting that he's given? Lydia.
I'll go. I welcome Murray. It's yeah, nice to meet you in person. I guess I've got a few questions around the report here. And the first questions that I come to is around the membership of the governance group. And so it's quite different if I look at our terms of reference. And so I'm just wondering how we come to what our governance group looks like. Is like, yes, Sam, you're the chair, and now states that Tim is the co-chair. Whereas our terms of reference state a reporting officer, you know, Malcolm is our deputy, and just how we work through what this looks like. And we mentioned that Taumutu is not on there as a strategic partner, but Megan is here at the table with us from Taumutu. So I don't know how that fits in for Megan and Taumutu.
Sure.
That's my first question.
Yeah. So there's probably a couple of things you can answer them as well, but some of that language probably isn't quite right. So Tim isn't the co-chair of this meeting. He's not a member of the governance committee. He's the staff lead to support the committee. And Malcolm is the deputy, as you said. So that we can update that. And Murray's role is not on this, but we haven't formally shifted or changed that. So again, but he will sit at this table in the same way that Tim sits at this table and be present at every meeting, which this diagram is reflected of, but maybe not the language that we have sitting around that. So we can that can be updated. And Murray, if you want to explain any further how your understanding of that governance piece sits. And the strategic partners need to include mana whenua. And so Ngāi Tahu is written there, but we haven't included Ngāi Tahuhere or Taumotu as strategic partners in this work. And because a lot of what we're developing and what we've said when we did the Waiora One water strategy, that was done for whoever is responsible for delivering of water services to our community, whether that's council, whether that was back, I mean, it was started being developed under the previous government's changes, and now it will function under the local water done well piece. And mana whenua is partner to that agreement. So they are strategic partners in this work, and hence naming them explicitly on the side as a part of that.
Okay.
That doesn't override or change Megan's place here as their appointee to work with us in this work.
And if I could just add in addition to that, we had an introductory session with Ngāi Tahu Tuariri and Taumotu in the last week, I think it was. So we've aligned ourselves in terms of updates and making sure that we provide information via that channel as well as through Megan's attendance here as a councillor.
Yeah, and that was a meeting. It was with Ngāi Tahu and Taumotu. Yeah, Ngāi Tahuhere weren't there in their capacity as partner with us. So that's still a work in progress, in the same way that there's a space on council for Ngāi Tahuhere if they would like to engage in this work. There's an opportunity for them too. Megan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to that. So this is a little bit technically incorrect, because the strategic partners are Taumotu and Ngāi Tahuhere. Ngāi Tahu, Te Rūnanga and Ngāi Tahu aren't involved in this at all. There's a company that's been set up though by Te Rūnanga and Ngāi Tahu called Te Kuta Takapini, and their role is to support and enable mana whenua interests in fresh water. So they're only there to support us. So they're not technically a strategic partner. The strategic partner is only Taumotu and Ngāi Tahuhere, and only them at our invitation to come and support us. And so that's where I probably think this is technically incorrect and probably shouldn't list individuals. But I think it raises a point that this is a public document and the governance structure is technically not quite correct. And if we can tidy those things up, it means that we can actually move on to the bigger discussions, because they stick with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My other questions are around, I just note that we, it says in the critical path for January that we are recruiting directors as of the 20th of January.
I can respond to that. So in terms of the CCO Establishment Board, we necessarily begin with the development of a skills matrix, so that we have a whole bunch of things ready to go once the decision is made. That is sitting in final draft at the moment, ready for consultation with the executive ELT, Sam, and our strategic partners. And then that will sit there ready to go, awaiting 3rd of April if the decision to establish is made. So
Would that not come to us for feedback either, or is it just to Sam?
No, the answer is yes, it will come to this committee. Yeah.
And some of this is because we're doing work in parallel. Things are having to start now so that we're ready for the time frame that we've got to meet us. And as Murray said, there's off ramps should we not be required, but we need to be prepared and ready with the timeline we've given us.
And so the July timeframe is pretty tight.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's very tight. And I guess, we're looking at consultation going out on the 20th of Feb, and the consultation draft document is currently being worked on. Will we see that at the 12th of February meeting for approval?
Yes.
Going to come forward, Sarah, just say that's recorded and you can speak into a microphone.
The document is getting close to being able to be shared with this group ahead of that time. That timeframe hasn't been confirmed yet, but it will be soon.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's about all me at the moment.
Thanks, Lydia. Megan.
you. So I have a number of questions. So it's trying to get an understanding of like what falls in the role of an establishment chair and then what comes back to this committee. And I'm anticipating quite a bit will come back to this committee if we're going to increase the times that we meet so that we can actually have our eyes over things. And I would anticipate things that will be critical for us to decide upon are the Constitution. And before we can decide upon an appropriate constitution, we need to decide what type of entity we're going to be. Are we going to be for profit, not for profit? What does it all look like? What does it mean? And those will be some of the options that we take through to the community to say this is our preferred model. But we have to do the work stream in parallel. So I think if we are prioritising what must come back here and by when, you know, my first cabs off the rank would be the Constitution and also the appointment of directors to determine, you know, what type of directors we want and what role that we want to have in that appointment, and to actually guide and decide on what the appointment process will look like. So they're my kind of first cab off the rank priorities, if we can do them, and others might have others. My other question on this paper for now is there seems to be, when I look at who the critical advisors are, and then who some of the strategic partners are, and that's now going to include Taumitu and Ngāi Tuahuriri, and understanding what Sam said before, that this whole new entity will be guided by our One Water strategy, which we've adopted, then is there anybody with the advisor skill to advise on the cultural matters that come out of that One Water strategy? Is that a skill gap that we currently have to advise into the project steering group?
So one of the specific requirements within the skills matrix that's been drafted is a link to Ao Māori and the various matters that are important and relevant to the One Water strategy. So I think when, when you see that draft, we'll certainly welcome any feedback on whether it goes far enough or not far enough in order to make sure that we have that input into the project steering group and ultimately into the CCO once it's established, if that's where we get to.
So you have somebody with the skills to be providing, like you've got a hired consultant who can provide that level of cultural advice into all of the documents so far and into the project steering group?
No, not at this.
Am I expected to do that?
No, so the answer is no and no. But once we've gone through the operational workshop in terms of developing the much more detailed program of activity, we'll have a very clear view of the nature of the partnership that needs to be explored and developed, and we'll be coming to ask for assistance and help from the appropriate people to give us that support. On your two earlier points, the Constitution is currently being drafted. So this group will see that document once it's completed in draft form, as will there be further discussions around the type of entity that will be established under that constitutional framework.
Mike, can I ask on the Constitution piece, that we'll need a bit more workshopping rather than just presentation on that for the input from, I guess, from the One Water work that, and just the links to see what flows through as a document that very recently adopted as a council. So I guess, Tim, that's thinking about our own timetable and how we provide enough time to do that in a meeting and the right structure, because probably sitting around a room like this might not be the right way to go about doing that as well. Over the back, Sharon. Oh, sorry, Megan, there was another question I think Megan had asked first that maybe Murray, did you see there were a couple of other things? Do you have anything else to say?
No, just mention the Constitution.
Okay. Sharon?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Julie and I were just sitting here conferring in the back. I think what's really important is we have a guiding document that is laying out clearly. So we have sought some legal advice from Simpson Grierson, and that document very clearly outlines the steps that we need to take as we look and review of all of the options. What I was just saying to Julie as well, it is legally privileged. I think it is worthy that that document should be shared with you, because I think it lays out really nicely and clearly a number of the steps, rationale behind the steps, in some of the legal requirements. And Julie, I'll look to you to just provide a bit more clarity than I can, but I think that's quite an important foundation document for you to have access to.
So one thing that has changed since we last spoke to you and as full council in November around this is the introduction of what is called Bill 3 of the Local Water Done Well. That is a very detailed piece of legislation. It's 363 sections plus schedules long around how this is done, with what form the entities can take, constitutional requirements. It lays everything out, and while it won't be law by the time we set up our CCO, we will be looking to set it up in compliance with that. And we've been given a series of advice around how we start to guide that will inform the workshops that Murray and Tim are running to start to guide what are the decision making and everything that has to come out of that to ensure we're able to comply with and do all those things. We've had it and we've got advice which we'll share from both a regulatory and from a commercial setting up an entity perspective with that overlay around it. So it's a work in process, and as you've all said, running in parallel at the same time.
Megan, do you?
Yeah, so I still have a element of concern about the timeframes that this is going to move at, right? So we know it's really tight timeframes. We've identified that there is going to be a need for cultural input and advice, and knowing how Runanga operates, and I just don't understand, right? There's going to be no voice from mana whenua in this when it's not built into the process at the outset. So if you're going to get legal advice and pay for it, why aren't you getting cultural advice and paying for it? If it's this important and this critical and this Local Water Done Well, water is one of those areas that we've said is most important to us. So yeah, I'd really advocate for it, and understanding that there's obviously money in the budget to get a program director and other things, then I see this as just as important.
Sure.
Thank you, Megan. And I think we touched on that at the meeting that you, Murray, Sam and I attended with Tamutu and others around actually having some representation. And I think that we loosely left it that it would be really useful to make sure that there is representation through all layers, whether it's operational and where's the best group or best person to do that. So I think we'd sort of seek that guidance from Tamutu as to whether some of the people that were in that room are the most appropriate people to be sitting and participating in the discussion. So we did highlight it there, and we're really happy to support that, but we would just need that guidance as to who around that table or of the group that were present, who else you would like to see or invite or have sponsored into that role, whether it's yourself or another.
What I'm talking about is a paid cultural advisor inputting into the work stream, not a new governance layer.
Sorry, it wasn't necessarily even governance. It was whether it's across the layers, whether it's the project governance group or at that operational level. So we can do that, but we just need to know who the right person is. So I guess that is our ask of you, and I think from that meeting is to identify who that would be and come back and we can know who the most appropriate person is to engage.
I didn't get that from the meeting. I thought I was raising a new idea.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't awfully clear at the meeting. I do apologise.
So I'm interested to hear how others feel about this, but there's the sense, Murray, that we needs to have that level of cultural input into the foundation from the beginning of this process, and the documentation and the heartbeat of whatever we might set up.
And you shall have it.
Perfect.
Well, I'd had a couple of questions, but first up, yes, I support that just in the sense that, you know, if you're ever doing any research and you want to make sure it's going to cover all the bases, you have to actually have somebody there giving you advice, much like the legal stuff. Representation on different working groups and everything is asking a single person at your various touch points, but it's quite different when there's somebody there working on it and providing advice right from the start, and there is that risk that the constitution and various other layers aren't going to have as much as we need. And it's literally the sort of thing that the One Water strategy is about, is literally having somebody embedded in the process, not just asked occasionally, who then potentially has to go back to a Runaka meeting, and then maybe, you know, depending on the timeline, that could be 6 weeks, and we don't have 6 weeks. So if they're there in the first place, part of the structure, that's actually quite different. So my one question was around submission for Bill 3. Is that something that we're likely to talk about at the 12th, February 12th?
Should just ask Julie, who's over some of that legal stuff. Julie, do you want to answer that?
Sorry, sitting right behind you all. Yes, we have I'm sitting in Sam's inbox at the moment.
Good.
Is a in principle document from Simpson Grierson around the subject that it's recommended that we submit upon. A draft, it will be prepared by mid next week to bring to you all for your feedback and approval for submission by mid-February.
Cool, because that would be good to circulate to all councillors, but I get that potentially it'll be approved either by full council or this committee, depending on the timeline. But yeah, it is a rather large bill. And the other question I had was, you mentioned around budget and providing more information about how that would likely be used. Do you think the money that we have allocated so far is enough?
The quantum, I think, will need to change. I think the allocation to the preparatory stage is sufficient, but there's likely to be a crossover between the end of the preparatory stage and into the establishment phase full blown. I can't give you the quantum of that at the moment, but this workshop that's coming up on the 11th and 12th of February will provide me with the opportunity to work with the finance team to build a budget which will actually give you and me a lot more detail about what we think needs to be done. There's an awful lot of work that we simply don't have the capacity to deal with internally.
Thank you.
I'd much rather be upfront with it
Yeah,
as early on as I can.
that's why I asked the
with
question.
script, I think.
So
Thanks. Bob, do you have anything you want to?
Just one of the things, before we go out for consultation, will we have some idea of what's this all going to cost our community per unit or whatever over a, say, 10-year period? So it might be higher at the beginning and go down or something. But I think if we're going to consult, that would be the main thing we'd be consulting on.
Yes, that information will be made available to this group and it will be included in the consultation document. The financial modelling is in the throes of being completed today. The deadline is close of play this afternoon.
No, I'm fine.
So, Murray, do you want any further things through the conversation you thought? Mind if I just?
Look, I think it's really just a request. This work is important for the district as we lead into the decision point on the 2nd of April. And my request of you is when I or others are looking for advice and guidance and support from you, please provide it. I know that the council has made a series of decisions at the back end of 2024 that have put us on this trajectory. We're here to serve those decisions and be as purposeful as we can in delivering what the district needs. So that's my only request at this stage. Thank you, Sam.
And today there's been a bit of discussion about some background documentation and things, so we'll make sure that's circulated to everyone. The final decisions and even the consultation decisions are going to be for full council, so some of that stuff will need to be shared with all councillors, not just this group. And Sharon, you'll send it out, or Tim, you'll send it out to everyone. Cool. Our next meeting then is scheduled for Wednesday, the 12th of February in the afternoon. And we will look to schedule following that, some other 1 hour briefings that'll be online only. If you happen to be here, that's cool, but they'll be online based for those catch ups. I had nothing further for this meeting, nothing on the agenda.
And sorry, one further question,
Yeah.
just to be crystal clear, because I know it's been talked about a bit outside of the meetings, is the director's appointments. This committee, will we be determining what the appointment process looks like? Will that be a decision for us, or is that a decision for someone else?
That would be a decision for you. But provided advice coming from me and others in the organisation. And then the director appointments, correct me if I'm wrong, are council appointments.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, thank you. And so when the part that's what I thought, but then I was a bit confused when it said about, you mentioned earlier about the program director would then somehow transition over into a board role.
No, sorry, no.
I've
no.
missed that.
Sorry, no, I could do a rollover into an interim establishment CE role, so it's the most senior executive role.
Yep. So the appointment of directors will be the same as they are for CORD, or when we have to appoint directors to the museum board or anything else, and that it's the governance group will end up making the decisions around the capabilities that we're looking for, any outlines around what we want, but all that's built on the advice from staff or the advice of the chair of the board that we're appointing to, and the way that we've gone through the employment process and interviews has often been with the chair included on the interview panel, with myself and with an elected member, and with someone else in that room as well. And it's often been Annalisa has performed that role. If we've needed people from Tumutu, they've been involved in that role. If we've needed some particular care around thinking about having the right person on the appointment panel for that group, this committee at the moment will be in discussion about who they should be. Sharon?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And just in addition to that, the Bill 3 lays out very clearly, as it stands at the moment, its expectations around skill base for directors' appointments. So there's some narrative and subsections in there that clearly outline the expectations too.
And probably finally, and this will come through one of the emails that get sent through, is at the moment, Bill 3 leaves the CCO rather too close to council's political influence on the outcomes of that CCO for us to be able to attract the best people into that role. It puts us at risk of not necessarily being able to attract the best people into those roles due to the ongoing influence that council could choose or could choose not to exert over that CCO, and that reflects different practices around the country. It hasn't been the practice of this council to get particularly involved in the running of our CCOs. That's why we have boards, but that's one of the things that you'll notice in the advice back from St Grierson is a risk around that if the legislation isn't changed. Okay, end of the meeting then, and I'll close Unahia, po, te po, kia wātia, ai, kua wātia, kia ora everyone, and thank you for your contributions today. Ta, Murray.
Thank you, Sam.